my name is Meenakshi. I have worked at Oregon Health and Sciences University for a very long time. That's like 15 years. And I'm a geneticist. And I have a PhD in biochemistry, and I'm a medical doctor. Okay. So today what I'm representing is I started my company, the Scrutinizer. So I just wanted to give you a brief background about myself, and then we can go over, of course, the most exciting field, the genetic counseling, right? So what I am working on is I started a company called the Scrutinizer because lately, so it's a science-based information website where you can, I call it a one-step information portal, meaning you can go to this portal and get information in lay terms on any topic you want. And this is because there has been a lot of misinformation in the society. If you know, I don't know, but for example, people are confused about gluten-free food or what to eat or what supplements to take and so forth. Yes? Is anyone aware?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this is the last slide of my Scrutinizer. I wanted to show you what is a difference between science-based and an evidence-based medicine. I hope you guys can see this cartoon.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Remember how there is all this thing about anti-vaccination in the nation lately, which could bring back and I'm not influencing anybody in any way, but for example, here, these kids, I'm showing that they have autism. Then we say that they received vaccination, and then we say, oh, well, the vaccination caused autism. Now, this is evidence. This is not science-based because there is no scientific evidence for it, meaning there are no 50 years or 100 years of research saying that this happens. Or in the same lines, we can say these children have autism, and they are playing with this teddy bear. So the evidence states that teddy bear can cause autism. Similarly, there's a cat. It has 4 legs. The horse has 4 legs, and evidence can say that this animal is in fact a cat.
So that's a great thing.
Yes. So that's the evidence-based medicine where we make a mistake. We take one anecdote and we say, well, this is what science says, and so we should not do this. So that is what I am combating in my company. Okay, and my list goes on. So if you guys would want to visit this website later on, and it's perfectly fine, I'll give it to Miss Doyle. Also, after we have discussed the genetic counseling, if you guys have any questions, you could always email me. I would, if Miss Doyle is okay with that. Okay? So, for genetic counseling, before I go into genetic counseling now, let's just review really quick what's genetics. I'm assuming you guys have had quite a few courses on hereditary genes, DNA, chromosome, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so the genetics term, it's a Greek word, gene. It means to become or grow into. And we all know, that this is Gregor Mendel, and he was the father of genetics, right? He was a priest, and he started his sweet pea experiments from where we have grown into this full-fledged field, right? Okay, so here I'm showing, I wanted to go and say, so this is a chromosome. So DNA is the basic material, right, that contains the genetic instruction, and a bunch of DNA, a whole sequence of DNA would make a gene. Genes are located on the chromosome as shown in these shaded areas, and these are the ones they are going to carry the genetic information, or also anything goes wrong, these are the ones that we say are the genetic diseases, right? So they are located on the chromosome, and we know that we inherit humans have 23 chromosomes, right? So we inherit half set from our mom and half from a dad, okay? And the whole collection of genetic information is called a genome. So what is genetic counseling? What do you guys understand? Shall I ask?
From what I understand about genetic counseling, you would be the one, I mean, obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, but you would be the one to explain to parents who had some kind of a genetic test done for their unborn child about what conditions a child may have and what they could do about that. Correct?
Yes. That would be a counselor. For example, I'm a doctor, so the MD would diagnose the patient and everything, but then we have special counselors. They are gonna provide the information and advise the family and the patient about the genetic condition. And as we just discussed, these are the conditions caused by changes known as mutations or deletions or any kind of inherited patterns. So we do not want to confuse the genetic counseling with a psychological counseling or psychotherapy, or that it's not a counseling or a therapy used to treat a mental health condition such as anxiety or depression. It is totally related with the diseases that are caused by genetics. So the purpose of genetic counselor is to comprehend the medical facts. So they would look at the diagnosis and they're going to look at the facts and then decide a course of disorder to available the management of the disease. They will make the best possible adjustment to the disorder in the affected family members, and they would choose a course of action which is appropriate for the family, and they have to respect the wishes of the family. So who needs a genetic counselor? Either people who have a birth defect or a genetic condition, or the parents who have had a child with a birth defect, they would require genetic counselor. Or if parents have a child and they can see they have developmental delay, a mental retardation and so forth. Or there are women who have had miscarriages. If there's a frequent miscarriage, that means there is something genetic related going on and they should see a genetic counselor. And there are people who are concerned that they might have inherited, and of course it depends on the family history, so they would need a genetic counselor. Then there would be some cases where the pregnancy, we do the test like an amniocentesis, the baby may have birth defects and they definitely need a genetic counselor. Okay, so then the last one would be that a family history of birth defects in the family or other kinds of genetic diseases, they would need a genetic counselor. And above all, there are couples who get married and they're blood relatives. So they definitely need a counselor even before they have a baby. Okay? So what's the process? What's the process of genetic counseling? In some cases, we need to make a diagnosis. That's one. But in other cases, like I outlined a few of the scenarios where diagnosis is already known and the goal is to confirm the established diagnosis so they can go to the next phase. So to make the diagnosis, in the first one where you hold an interview with the patient and the family. So this is when you do not know the diagnosis. This is if there is a suspicion that the patient can have or the babies can have a genetic disease. So the genetic counselor would collect the family history and all the relevant history. There would be a physical exam, other diagnosis, and the confirmation of the diagnosis is the next step. For both the scenarios, either you know that somebody has a genetic disease or they are the potential candidates. So some of the diagnoses are like, we will do a chromosomal analysis because you can look at the chromosomes, and if the chromosomes would show the breakage or missing or anything like that. Then there are biochemical and molecular tests, DNA testing, of course, you are aware of it, and other tests like x-rays, biopsy, and so forth, okay? So after all this initial things are done, there is a phase called analysis phase, where the genetic counselor now has all this information. They have the tests, they have the family history, they're going to go do a literature search. They would review the information they have. They would make a consult with other experts. And then they would compile the information and determine the risks to the patient, to the family, or if the disease is manageable, then what are the risks of it occurring again? So after the analysis phase, now is a little bit of a tougher phase because they need to communicate to the patient or to the family, depending. So the communication of the results and risk to the patient, they would discuss the natural history of the disorder. The counselor would tell them the treatment and what to anticipate, what can happen as the disease progresses and what can happen as they get the treatment, because there could be effects from the treatment as well. And then they would discuss the options available for everybody, the patient and the family. One of the things that a genetic counselor always should do, and they always do, is they take their time. They need to provide the moral support to the family, because getting these kind of diagnoses is very devastating. Even if it's a manageable condition, it's still devastating. So there would be questions from the family. They have to take the time. They do take the time, and they review the questions, they answer them, and they clear all the doubts of the patients. So that the communication phase is very, very important. Do you guys have any questions at this point?
What is the typical reaction you get when you inform somebody in a variety of cases?
Yes, usually depends. So there are metabolic diseases, for example, somebody has Wilson's disease. We would say that, okay, this child has Wilson's disease, but there is, of course, always a panic, but like in metabolic disorders, we would be like, okay, we can manage it with a diet, and so everything kind of is okay. However, there are other diseases, like I worked on Fanconi anemia, which is an autosomal recessive disorder, meaning both the parents carried one defective gene. So these are almost like the blood relatives. In this case, the diagnosis is that the child can only live up to 16 years of age. Now, that is a panic, and I don't think it always ends well. I mean, we can always make the patient comfortable, we can make the family comfortable, we can tell them that we can manage it, but there is no way we can save the life of this child. So then the next phase is a referral and a support phase, which is that knowing what kind of disease it is or a syndrome it is, the individual might be referred to a specialist for further intervention. For example, if it's they need a prenatal diagnosis, the counselor doesn't do that. The counselor is going to decide where to send the patient next, so they can see a specialist, they can have the treatment they need. And then they are going to support the decision that the counselee, the patient or the family makes. And the counselor is going to, of course, like I said, a psychological support is going to be provided. They are going to provide the psychological support throughout the process. And then the counselor has to follow up and evaluate. So even after sending them to a specialist, and the specialist is the one who is going to make a treatment plan and see the patient throughout the treatment process, but the counselor is going to always evaluate and provide the support. So the critical factors of the genetic counselor. So the one very critical point is that they should obtain a 3-generation genetic family history, a 3-generation. Then they need to assess the risk of disease in the family members. And then they would identify the risk factors that would impact the medical management, meaning these all 3 points, they would determine what kind of treatment it is and what kind of tests to do. For example, they will take the history of hemoglobin, history of heart attack, the renal disease, and so forth. And so having said that, the 3 generation, I don't know, have you guys done a pedigree? I'm assuming you have if you are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you are well familiar with all these squares and circles?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to show how it goes up to the 3 generations, and this is what they would make. They take a history, they would actually, instead of writing everything, they would write it's a male, female, the mating, and the child, and so forth, all right? And this shows the conditions, how I'm just showing one arbitrary picture here, how the disease might travel. For example, here, it's a mom who's affected, a dad who's unaffected. And so the probability is they can have children who could be affected. I mean, they could have 50-50 chance. It depends on the name of the trait that it's being transferred. Like I said, autosomal recessive would be 1 in 4. If it's dominant, it would be 50-50. So here, for example, they have a boy who's affected, a girl who's not affected. If she gets married to a man who is not affected, then of course the disease is gone from this family line at least. But they would have a risk. They would have a tendency. So these are the people who would still need a genetic counselor. On this line, because the son had a disease, of course he got married to somebody who did not have the disease, but they still got 3 children, out of which 2 were affected. So now these would be sent to the specialist. They would have a course of action, and of course the genetic counselor would be with them at every step of the way. Okay, so having said everything about the genetic counselors, so who are the genetic counselors? These are the people, they have postgraduate health degree, meaning you can do a bachelor's and then you can go and take a diploma in genetic counseling, or you could do a master's in genetic counseling. They then also, their training is the same as a residency, like an MD candidate would do a residency. They have experience in areas of medical genetics. Of course, they can be social workers as well, because they really need to know how to do the counseling. Of course, they need to know genetics as well. And the good thing about this degree is they can even go further, and they can even do research along with doing their genetic counseling and being a social worker. So it is, if it interests you, it is a good line of work. But yes, it is kind of sad as well, to meet with those parents and the patients. Okay, so what are the common genetic disorders I'm just outlining here? For example, cystic fibrosis. This is a chromosomal mutation where the lungs, they get filled with fluid and the kids can't breathe, and ultimately it is kind of horrifying death, not to be morbid. Then there is Huntington's disease. Down syndrome, I'm sure you all know. Then there is muscular dystrophy, where it's a muscle wastage disease. Sickle cell anemia, yes, it's genetic, but it's highly manageable. It has its side effects, but it is manageable with blood transfusions and so forth, because it's just an anemia and the RBCs become sickle-shaped. And just an interesting feature of this, I don't know if you guys studied this, is that it is more like an evolution thing that happened in the body. Did you guys know this?
I'm not sure if they remember it. The fact, yeah.
The sickle cell anemia, it evolved. As you know, it's mostly, not mostly, but it's in the African population. And because in Africa there was or is a lot of incidence of malaria, so that is an evolution of the body that it did, that they made the sickle cells. And because the mosquito can infect our regular red blood cells, so we are all prone to malaria if we get bit by the mosquito. But the people who have sickle cell anemia, they are resistant to malaria. So it had happened in that region. So body did it as an evolutionary feature. However, of course, there are negative parts to it as well. But the people with sickle cell anemia, they are resistant to malaria.
Are the carriers resistant to malaria also?
They are not as resistant.
Mm.
They have some form of resistance. The people who actually have anemia, they are completely resistant. The carriers are somewhat resistant.
Mm.
Yes. Then coming back to the genetic, I don't know, I listed here celiac disease. This is an iffy disease. Not really. I'm not going to talk about it. I don't know why I put it there. It's not really genetic. But then thalassemia.
Could you explain what thalassemia is? What is thalassemia?
So thalassemia is related to your B cells.
Okay. Oh, crud.
It is a blood disorder, and it would have... but it is pretty manageable. Did you say your cousin or who?
Yeah, my cousin adopted a boy from China who has thalassemia. And yeah, so I know it's manageable because he has like monthly or every couple months or something has to go and he has a blood transfusion done.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because there are defective B cells and then they need regular transfusions, but it's managed, yes.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so I think this was what I wanted to say, and we can do the questions.
What is the most common situation that you encounter?
Meaning, what is the common disease I would encounter?
Yeah.
The common disease, it would actually really depend on the area people live. Like United States, I would say there are all sorts of people. It's hard to say. It's very hard to say what that on a common day I would see how many patients of a Wilson's disease or a Crohn's disease or thalassemia and so forth. So I know there is a percentage according to the world population that how many diseases or what kind of genetic disease you would see, but it's very hard to say. I can't. In all these 15 years of my life, it's always you encounter something new every day.
Mm.
Like there would not be a day where, okay, there are all the Wilson's disease patients are coming in today. I mean, these are all still rare conditions and the populations are spread out. So, nope, hard to say.
Tay-Sachs disease has been found within the Irish population when it more originated with the never could say that.
Ashkenazi Jewish.
With the Ashkenazi Jews. And how is that? Has there been more research done on the incidence of Tay-Sachs in the Irish population, and perhaps how maybe it kind of got into there? Do they know more about this now?
Well, this would only so incidence, yes, that's called population genetics. And I don't keep up with Tay-Sachs or these diseases, but the way it would get into any other population is when they get married to the other people. So Tay-Sachs is a dominant disease. So even if there is one parent who has it, and then even if they get married to a person who doesn't have it, there would be a carrier. And then if two people get together, then the child would have it.
Okay. And it's autosomal dominant?
Excuse me?
It's autosomal dominant?
Dominant, yes.
Okay.
So this means even if one parent has it, then there are chances 50-50.
Okay.
Are you doing any research yourself on anything?
Yes, that's what I said. Before I started this company, which is 2 years ago, for 15, 20 years, my basic was Fanconi anemia, which is an Ashkenazi Jewish disorder. And the reason we say that is because if people inbreed, if they have their blood relatives and they get intermarry, because this disease that I'm talking about is an autosomal recessive disorder, meaning both the mom and dad, they have to be carriers. So they themselves don't have a disease, but they both carry one defective gene. So 1 in 4 of their children would have the disease. And this was started from like the University of Oregon president, Mr. Fernmeyer. He lost all his daughters. That was very strange, but it's only in his family, because initially when I started researching, and we thought it is a sex-linked disease because only his daughters were affected. But his third daughter, she did survive like up to 30 years of age. So basically what I did was I was trying to find treatments for Fanconi anemia because it has no treatment. Like I said, the kids usually survive up to 16 years of age. And that is also with multiple blood transfusions, bone marrow transfusions. So I did the viral and non-viral gene therapy. So I took because the one main drawback of any transfusion is you need to find matched donor, which is always very hard. And for bone marrow, it's not necessary that your siblings would be a match either. So to do the viral gene therapy, for example, I took a lentivirus, which is an HIV virus, but you take out all the pathogenic parts of that virus. And then you can put the good cDNA in it, because the whole idea of delivering the good cDNA into the patient is how to do that. That is what we are still like for multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, we still cannot do that because that is where we are stuck. But for Fanconi anemia, I had the advantage because these patients they are very sensitive to gamma irradiation, for example, or to the chromosomal breaking agents like mitomycin C. So yeah, that was my research. I made the viral vectors, got them into the mouse. I used the mouse model. I made a mouse that had the disease, because you can take you can manipulate, you can do a lot at the genetic level. So I have 2 or 3 different kinds of mice I made for this, because it's a syndrome. There are different axons that are inflicted. So, but we wanted to do a non-viral gene therapy. Then I moved on to doing just the naked DNA therapy. So I made a transposon. And a transposon is a chunk of DNA sequence which usually is dormant. I named it Sleeping Beauty. And I named it Sleeping Beauty because the transposon usually sleeps and then it wakes up one day and it integrates into the DNA and does its job. So this has been my 15 years of research.
That's cool.
Yeah. Are you still doing research on that, or are you now just basically working on your company?
Yes, now it's a non-profit organization. Yes, now I'm not doing any more research. I guess it was time. It was too long, and sometimes it gets really, really depressing. Yeah. So you're a medical doctor who's a geneticist versus the genetic counselor. So yes,
as the geneticist, you're not having to deal. What is then more your type of job description as a geneticist? My
one job description would be if a baby is born, or then the pediatrician sees that this baby has features or things like that, then I'm called and to do further investigation and diagnose. So my basic thing is diagnosis of the diseases. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Or then it's the management of the disease as well. So these patients, if whatever they need, like you said, your cousin has the boy has thalassemia, so he still is managed by a geneticist. But the genetic counselor would provide all those support and all the things that I just discussed. Right. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Ms. Doyle.
Thank you so much.